you plumb the dark for answers. Long you beg from beggars' empty hands, gifts of life they too were seeking, gifts none could share. Friend, how long will you wander? Friend, as long as you seek your home in a land where all are strangers, love locks her door. Lead to the weak his craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Lead to the weak his craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Turn, turn, turn within, in silence of soul, in cave of love, find my abode. Listen, whispering within your soul, hints of laughter, hints of joy, sweet songs of sadness, of quenchless yearning for the light, for my love, your true home.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start with a Whispers from Eternity, a prayer demand. And this morning, the demand is that God respond. Today, Father, thou hast come into my temple. Why thy coming? All the lights of my sense servants have sprung to life, and the door of my heart has been open wide. Thy blessing has driven away the darkness of ages, sending its heavy vapors fleeing at the first glimpse of thy approach. The loud beating drums of my craving announce thy manifestation. The incense of devotion rising from the incenser of my soul wafts upward to thee. Oh, bless me always. Respond to me whenever I call to thee. Om. Peace. Okay. We have an incredibly complicated topic today. Dun-dun-dun. So today it's talking about intuition, which is simple, versus the intellect, which is complex. And it's probably a pretty important topic because I had the same talk maybe like a couple months back, but it was called Reason versus Intuition. So same topic, just slightly different focus. And as I tuned in, there was a little bit more of, what the message, at least for me, to share was today. So intuition, simple, intellect, complex. So the reading references children a lot. And for the most part, we can say what we will about the personalities that we have when we're children, but for the most part, children are just being. They're not yet acting from the way that they think they should be, the way that they're expected to be, and all of the definitions that ego has acquired in this lifetime. And so as children, it's, if you think even how we can almost even have more compassion for children, it's because they're not thinking about it. They're just, whatever comes out of their mouth, or whatever they're doing, it's just, that's who they're being. There's an innocence to that. And however, so we can look back at our own childhood and say, oh yeah, I remember a simpler time when I was this way, when I wasn't clouded by, all of these ideas of who I should be or what my life should look like. It was simple. And Swami says this about being childlike. There's another quality children and saints have in common. It's the ability to live fully here and now. Children are much less inclined than adults to weigh everything in the balance, to compare present experiences with past ones, or with what others have experienced or said or thought. Children rarely weave complex webs of associated ideas around things. Life has not only spared most of them so far from disillusionment, it has also spared them from complexity. And so as we grow older, our personalities get more and more complicated. And we were listening to a video from Asha, and she was sharing how she bought into this idea of having to be perfect and playing out being the perfect disciple with Swami. And so he assigned her the job at the publications. And she says for almost 2 years, she was completely in conflict, trying to play out this idea of perfection, because she thought perfect disciple means I should already know. I should already know how to do this. Therefore, I shouldn't have to ask, right? Let alone ask Swami. And so she said for 2 years, she basically kind of ignored and disregarded and put aside everything Swami was sort of trying to guide. She said he couldn't even guide her because she wasn't allowing it. She was already in here, in her mind, about how to do things. And it created such tension and frustration. She said, she used the word fractured. I was so fractured at the end of the 2 years that Swami said, how are you doing, Asha? And she's like, I don't know. How am I doing, sir? And that's the tension of the intellect. That's why we can't meditate. What is that tension? It's all of those definitions against the reality of where we are and simply just being. And so the intellect is not, again, we don't demonize it. We need it, right? God gave it to us for a reason. But it's a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all, and let alone it's not the thing in the driver's seat. And I love this phrase that Gyandev used. He said, it's like a hammer, but just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything is a nail. You don't go around using the hammer for everything. You have to know when to use the hammer, when to use the chainsaw. We have a whole bag of tools. The intellect is one little piece. And mind you, it's the one piece that tends to complicate a lot of things if you allow it to be first. And so, yes, we have the intellect, but what else do we have? We have the heart. We have our intuition. And I thought of this example of Atma Jyoti. If you've met her, if you got to experience her during our weekend retreat, she's incredibly intuitive. And she had us do this exercise where, we were envisioning, next steps, projects and things, but, not from here, trying to be open to our intuition and to those little whispers from the soul. And so when she came around to ask me, what did you come up with? And so I started to share, and she was listening, and she's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That, she was feeling into where these certain thoughts and ideas were coming from. And she was picking up the vibe, and she said, yeah, that's great. And then all of a sudden I said, I wonder. And she said, no. Don't go there. Don't go there. But how quickly that snapshot of the whole weekend, that's what I remember. No, don't go there. Because the mind comes back so quickly, just like the breath when you practice Hangsa. You think you're not controlling it, and then you are. You really are. And it's pervasive, and it just keeps coming back. So it just stood out as an example of the vigilance. And really, like Swami was saying in that quote about children, the being in the here and the now. If we're present, then we can feel. It starts to have a texture and a context. When the ideas are flowing, you're like, oh yeah, that feels like a super conscious solution. Super conscious solutions generally simple, beneficial for all, expansive, inclusive, harmonious. Everything that doesn't feel like that is, there's just layers and a spectrum of everything to get to that point. But, the more we exercise that, the more we start to feel what that feels like in our channel. And so yesterday I was talking to a friend. My friend will have to excuse me. He's found himself in an incredibly complex situation. And he used this phrase that, he said, I gave up. I gave up. I'm just, talking to Master, and he was sharing what he was telling Master. But the point is the words, I gave up. Because to him, it was a little bit like, maybe some relief. But because we say that with such negativity, like, oh, I gave up. The ego is like, I didn't get it right, or I didn't figure it out. And I was like, that's a beautiful place to be. You gave up. Thank God you gave up, because now Master can actually come in and come in and solve it for you. And so that's the crux of it, is the fundamental belief with the intellect is I will figure it out. I have to. And so I was reflecting on this on my own before this talk, and I thought to do this little exercise with you because as I was telling my friend, everyone in here knows everything that I just told you. This is not news to you. You know that following the intuition, following the soul, tuning in, that's where it's at. And you know that to do that, you have to give up the control. You have to give up the wanting to be right or having to figure it out. But where is that jump? And so I just sat with a few thoughts that I thought maybe we can just close our eyes for a second. And instead of knowing with our mind, let's try to feel into these affirmations, if you will. Feeling with the heart, I don't have to be smart. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to know the answer to everything. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to be anyone. And as you sit with that, I don't know if you feel it, but when I did it, I felt so free. And that little leap that we have to make, what I kept hearing as I reflected on this, was faith. Because we can believe in God, we can believe in the Guru, and we can believe everything we hear when we come to Sunday service, but beliefs are still mental. Faith is when we bridge that belief with the experience. And we're here because we already have that experience. I mean, I took a step back, and I thought about, my mom, bless her heart, read the AY. And think about perhaps where you were a year ago, 2 years ago. And she said, I love that book, but I don't know about some of those stories. Those miracles, they're out there. They don't fit the logical mind. They don't fit in our boxes of how things are possible. But we're here because we've had enough experience to know that Master is in charge, that God is in charge, and that God has a plan, even when we don't know the plan. And so faith, the experience, is that bridge for us between trusting on the intellect, which is based in the senses and what we can see and what we can prove, and shifting to the absolute faith and being able to follow the intuition. And so Master shares this story in Essence of Self-Realization. Swami Shankaracharya, a great master in ancient India, was on the opposite bank of a river from where a close disciple of his was standing. With a quiet smile, he called to his disciple, "Come here." Unhesitantly, the young man stepped onto the water, and behold, a lotus leaf rose up and supported his foot. With every step, another leaf appeared until he crossed the river, where he cast himself at the Master's feet. From that day onwards, he became known as Padmapada, lotus feet. Padmapada had no experience of his guru's power to create lotus leaves to support people's feet. He had, however, experienced his guru's power in other ways. He therefore drew on that experience instead of blocking it out of his life with rational doubts and mental reservations. And it reminded me, I know some of you have watched The Chosen. I feel like they depicted this scene so beautifully of when they're out in the storm and Simon and Peter walked, Jesus is calling to him because he sees Jesus walking on water, and Jesus calls to him. And the moment he steps into his mind and realizes, I can't walk on water, he starts to plummet, and then, Jesus reached for his hand. But that depiction is so beautiful because that's us every step of the way. God's continuously asking us to step off the boat, and we're like, I can't. I have to trust this thing that I know, this thing that I can see, this thing that I can prove. But, the living from intuition and flow, it's not going to make sense to us. It's not going to make sense to anybody. And we have to build the faith. And I think the critical part of that story is Master says, he therefore drew on that experience instead of blocking it out of his life with rational doubts and mental reservations. And I think that's a beautiful tool for intuition, to continue building on it, is write down every time you witness a miracle. Yesterday, during our Learn to Meditate in Spanish, there was a woman who I think my soul kind of recognized right away. And I was like, oh, she's a disciple. She's Master's child. And it's beautiful because the words she said were, when she came in was, I'm looking for a guide, and I to me that was like there's nothing more obvious to me than her being called, her being drawn here. But she said after last week's first class that she left and she kind of got lost on the road, and she said normally I would get frustrated, but for whatever reason in that moment she was thinking about where she had been, and she was asking, she says, I always ask for signs. And she said, I asked God for a sign that I was going in the right direction, that coming here to Ananda was her in the right direction. And she like was almost kind of scared to share it, or like, you're not going to believe me. Like, I didn't get to take a picture of this, and she said, something told her, look to the right. And she looks to the car to the right, and like on their little, the little mirror that you pull down, I guess it was like on the side of the window facing her, she says there was a photo of Master. Yeah, she was like, I tried to take a picture, but the car stopped. And I was like, I believe you. I was like, I don't need proof, But the thing is, we're not always in that space. Again, the mind comes in to take over. We've had those miracles over and over. We've had Master Swami come to us very directly, very clearly. And yet, if we leave room for it, the doubt kicks in or the reasoning kicks in. And so the exercise, I think, for living in our intuition is building that faith, building the experience, recalling, it says drawing on that experience again and again with writing it down, with, like Davy told us, using the positive practice of memory, not using memory to negate the presence of God, using memory to remind yourself that God has been there always, that God is there. And the more we do that, the more we can pray like that demand and just know that, of course, he's going to answer. That is already, it's a conviction, it's already there. If I pray, God will answer. If I ask, he will answer. And if I have that knowing, why would I try to figure it out myself? Once I'm solid in that knowing, there's no reason for me to try to figure things out. I can just go back to the business of just being a channel for him. And so let's build on our faith and draw on our experiences with the masters to continue to live in a super conscious.